Hello everyone, Salam Namaste, Adab and welcome to today's event. Today we have a topic which has much to do with the colonial past and the education in that colonial past, Scottish intervention in British colonialism, radicalism and education in colonial India. And the speaker is a very well-known education specialist, professor and historian of history of education at Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. She has written wonderful books. Four of those books are displayed here in part of poster on the upper side. And she will be formally introduced by Professor Amal Patwat, who was a professor and director at the Center for English Language at Ambedkar University in Delhi. And the concluding remarks will be given by Professor Mazhar Hussain, a former professor of Center of Indian Languages at Jawaharlal Nehru University. All these speakers are in the field of education and languages. So we are in good hand and hope that we are going to learn a lot. Thank you all. And now I invite Professor Patwat, Amol Patwat, sir, to have the formal introduction.
Thank you so much, Mr. Razi. And at the outset, I would like to thank Indian Diaspora Washington DC Metro Group for organizing this talk by Professor Parimala V, because she indeed has lots of stimulating ideas to provoke us. And special thanks for giving me this opportunity to be here to give introductory remarks. But first of all, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. As you mentioned earlier, Professor Parimala Rao is currently Professor of History of Education at Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. She did a PhD in Modern Indian History from JNU, and she is on the editorial boards of many eminent journals like History of Education UK, History of Education Quarterly USA, and Pedagogica Historica Germany. She was a visiting fellow at Institute of Education London, and she is also a member of many renowned national and international academic bodies. As Mr. Razi mentioned earlier, some of her most renowned publications include a very recently published, hot from the press, Routledge Companion to History of Education. And I think I can very safely add that for anyone who wants to venture into the field of history of education, this book is the starting point. She has addressed a very, very long pending need and gap in the country. Another book which shows her academic caliber and very path-breaking kind of research is Beyond Macaulay. The second edition has just come out. And another one is Foundation of Tilak's Nationalism, where for the first time she brought out very new perspectives on a very well-known, quite established, but often wrongly perceived personality, that is Tilak. In addition to that, she has published a large number of research articles, book chapters, and she also has a substantial number of conference presentations to her credit. Professor Rao is not just an academic, she's also an activist in the sense that she very, very proactively tries to promote history, interest in the history of education, which is not really a very glamorous field. No, it doesn't attract too many people. So she has been very, very passionately trying to spread the virus wider. The talk that we are looking forward to today, I think the title of the talk itself gives us a brief idea, but let me also explain a couple of things about it, about the background. When we talk of the colonial history, the general perception, especially in India, is that this colonial rule is often seen in terms of simplified binaries. On the one hand, there is supposed to be a very uniform and homogeneous British colonial administration. And on the other hand, there is an entire resisting, fighting, suffering nation called India. It's largely a very, very simplified binary. Having said that, we also noticed that there is a more ready recognition of the diversity and complexity of one party, the Indian nation, in terms of different ideological currents, political positions, types of people, and so on, but not so much about the other party, the British colonial administration. Whereas this colonial administration was a very complex and dynamic entity comprising of very diverse people and perspectives who were very different and sometimes even conflicting. And consequently, colonial policies and plans were never uniform or unanimous, whether at different times or in different places. To just give a very ready example, the policies and regulations on land relations or property rights or land revenue collections were very different across the three presidencies of Bombay, Madras, and Bengal. In 19th century, education was one of the very central concerns for both the parties, of course, for different reasons. And some of these reasons Professor Rao will be explaining in her talk. The area of the history of education, especially the 19th century history of education, is very diverse and very complex. It is marked by different positions, attitudes, currents, approaches, both among the native people as well as the colonial officers. However, the historical explorations education are often seen to be dominated by a very, how should I put it, simplified and flattened approach. To give a few examples, Macaulay is always flogged as the villain behind the English education, or Elphinstone is hailed as the true savior of vernacular education, or a general understanding that natives took to English education just for lucrative government jobs. These are some of the examples of this simplification and flattening. But the reality is quite different. I'm sure that Professor Rao's talk today will unravel this complexity of the scenario. And I'm sure she is also going to bust a few myths on the way. In particular, she will try to show the varied and sometimes conflicting positions of many colonial officers who played important role in the colonial education policies and developments in a very nuanced way, and probably for the first time in the history of education in India. She would be tracing these differences to the backgrounds of these officers, both in terms of social, political, and historical circumstances of their homelands and their own personal backgrounds. And here she would be particularly focusing at the Scottish officers. So let us, in short, look forward to an illuminating talk and stimulating talk, which I'm sure will, in the end, raise quite a few pertinent questions. So here is your time, Professor Rao, over to you, and I request you to kindly begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Indian Diaspora Group, for inviting me to share my research. And thank you, Professor Amol Padward, for your kind words. I would like to share my PPT. Is it visible?
Yes.
Yeah, you might want to shift to the presentation mode.
Is it okay now?
Not yet.
You can
No, but
put
it
on
It hasn't
Slideshow
gone into
mode?
the slide.
No, I have done it, but for some reason it doesn't show. Even my previous presentations also, they pointed it out to me. Is it okay? Is it readable?
It is.
Yeah, it is.
It is. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You wanted to put on a presentation mode.
That's not working for her. For some reason, she's saying.
Oh, okay.
So this is a very small part of my latest book, Routledge Companion to History of Education. And I discuss various variables, that influenced British educational policies in India, and Scottish intervention was one such variable. Now, the conventional understanding of colonialism is it is monolithic. Most of the, the ideas, the theories that have been applied to analyze British colonialism has taken from French and Spanish colonialisms. These two colonialisms and many other European colonialisms were almost monolingual, monoreligious, and monocultural. As a result, we have virtually 100% Spanish-speaking Catholic Christian Latin America. Almost all countries are almost all Spanish-speaking, except Brazil, which is Portuguese-speaking. But then there is a kind of a single identity that exists there. British colonialism was different. Britain had 4 languages: English, Welsh, Gaelic, and Scottish languages. And English and Gaelic are not mutually intelligible. They are different. They come from different family of languages. They also had multiple, Protestant denominations. Officers coming from these backgrounds carried forward their experiences and worldviews. And it is this reason, this is a multiplicity of language, different kinds of Protestant denominations that brought diversity to colonial administration. Conventionally, any British officer who was, who was very, very beneficial to Indian interests have been regarded as liberal imperialists. But then liberal imperialist term does not actually define or explain who they were. It was then when I started doing research about 15 years back that I discovered all these officers who fought for Indian causes, they all came from Scotland. Majority of them came from Scotland. Now, the contestation is not between England and Scotland. It is not between English and Scottish. It is between the Scottish poor or Scottish commoners versus English and Scottish aristocracy. So it is more of a class conflict with strong ethnic background. The English aristocracy and elites and the Scottish aristocracy came to India as senior officials, as governors, governor generals, and so on. The English and the Scottish poor came to India as copiers and cadets. In modern terms, they were clerks and soldiers. And what distinguishes between the English and the Scottish poor is the Scottish poor who came to India as clerks and as soldiers, they rose very high in colonial administration. Charles Grant is one such example. He was orphan of a soldier who took part in Scottish Rebellion of 1745. He went on to become director of East India Company. You do not find another English orphan reaching that position. You have the example of John Malcolm, came from an extremely poor shepherd's family. The family was so poor. At the age of 11, he was brought from Scotland. His father brought him from Scotland to London for recruitment. The recruiters for the East India Company said that he is too young. The minimum age for recruitment was 13, and he was 11. So they told him to bring his son back, 2 years later. So he came to India at the age of 13 and a half as soldier in the army. But he went on to become the governor of Bombay. Why did the English poor lost out? It's essentially because the kind of education system that existed in England. Scottish education system has been, explained very well by, historian R.D. Anderson. I mean, this is a very complex issue. I'm just giving small snippets so that, as a background to my today's presentation. In Scotland, village primary schools were linked to high schools and universities. So the poorest of the poor from the village, from the rural background, if they are bright, they could reach the universities. Whereas in England, you have Brian Simon, Richard Aldridge, Eric Hobsbawm, who have written on this. The poor sent their children to poor school or village primary schools, and they could not progress further. The elite sent their children to expensive preparatory schools, grammar schools, and universities. So a Scottish shepherd boy could become a governor, an English shepherd boy could not. So this is the basic distinction, So when they start arguing certain things, so you will know the difference, why Monroe is arguing a particular point and why others are arguing a different point, because they come from different social backgrounds. Now, how did the Scots land up in India? In 1600, when the East India Company was established, Scotland and England were two separate countries. Scotland was extremely poor, and conventional estimate is only 10% of agricultural land. Rest of it hardly produced anything. 1690s, there were several years of famine and consequent starvation. And finally, the Acts of Union were signed between Scotland and England, and a new kingdom called Great Britain emerged out of that. The political union of 1707 did not mean complete merger. Scotland retained its legal system, the schools, the universities, as well as the Presbyterian Church. And all these areas continued to be autonomous to a large extent. Of course, there was always pressure from the above, but still. Historian David Armitage says that England and Scotland retained their particular religious and political institutions and remained in more respect divided by Protestantism than united by it, unquote. So transition was not smooth. After the Acts of Union, this transition was not smooth. Scottish uprising of 1715 and 1745 was ruthlessly suppressed by the English.
Sorry to interrupt. Are you changing the slides? Because the slide is still on the first page.
Oh my God. Just a minute.
I think you might have shared the PowerPoint instead of the screen. If you share the screen, it will behave differently.
Now, is it moving?
Yes.
Okay. It is working in this mode. Sorry.
Yeah, when you shared, I think you shared the PowerPoint as an application.
Yes, I shared that. Yeah,
if you unshare and share the screen, then it will work properly in the slide mode.
Okay. I mean, if this works, then it is fine.
Okay.
If this is working,
that's okay.
Thank you.
It's working,
right.
and you just keep changing.
Sorry.
Thank you.
However, the jobs provided by East India Company helped the consolidation of this union. Historian McGilvery has said that India patronage was a major strand whereby consolidation was achieved and the very concept of Great Britain sustained. Many of us who are working on colonial period, always we are concentrating on how British policies impacted India. We have hardly looked at how India impacted the domestic policies in Britain. Walter Scott has said in 1821, India is the corn chest for Scotland, where we poor gentry must send our youngest sons as we send black cattle to the south. Initially, it was not easy because of the language barrier. Irecourt, the commander of the Battle of Gondivash, complained that the Highland soldiers did not speak English and it was difficult to give commands in the battlefield. So to derive advantage of getting jobs in East India Company, the Gaelic and Scots speakers had to learn English language. After 1745 Scottish Rebellion, English was adopted as a medium of instruction at all levels. Now, this is again a very vast area and a very good research has been done in this regard. When it was adopted, where it wasn't adopted, the problems related to that. But I'm just giving a very simple idea here. The Scots series of books which were produced in England to teach the Scots English as a second language. Same books were imported to India by private school managers to teach English to Indians as a second language. So even before the Scots start intervening within the colonial administration, interfering in the colonial administration, there is already a link. After acquiring English education, the Scots did not lose their distinct national identity. Even those Scots who were born and raised outside Scotland cherished the distinct Scottish identity and became more self-consciously Scottish than the people who were born and raised in England. So here is a list of 20 educators who really fought for, introduction of education, supporting Indians, employment of Indians in the colonial administration at the higher level and so on. Out of 20, 17 of them are Scots. And 3, Charles Trevelyan was Cornish, Alexander Arbuthnot was Anglo-Irish, and Francis Warden, whose English-speaking family came from Portugal, I could not trace his, the background, whether he was English or Scottish. So I'm not going to speak, because of lack of time, I'm not going to speak about each one of them. I will concentrate on Thomas Munro and Evo Hume, mainly because I want to cover both South India and North India, so that we have some kind of a parity here. But if there is time, I can always come back to this slide, and if somebody wants to know about any particular personality here, I can speak about that. Now, before beginning the actual discussing the personalities, I would like to make a clear distinction between the scholars and Orientalists, because Scottish officers are always contesting the Orientalists and the Orientalist construct. So people like William Jones and R.T.H. Griffith and other British Sanskrit and Persian scholars, they believe that no satisfactory account can be given of any nation with whose language we are not perfectly acquainted. They were scholars, they were academics, they were interested in understanding the other culture. To H.T. Prinsep, H.H. Wilson, and other Orientalists, every accumulation of knowledge about people over whom we exercise dominion, founded on the right of conquest, is useful to the state. So the reason for learning the Oriental languages is very different for the scholars and the Orientalists. The Scots contested and opposed the Orientalists and refused to implement their policies. Now, the Scottish contention, opposition to the colonial administration, I put it in 2 categories. One is contestations, the another one is subversions. Now, the Orientalists argued, this is not one person arguing, it is throughout. Indians are indolent, incapable of understanding modern sciences. At best, they would be promiscuous crowd of English smatterers. Indian ruling class do not send their wards to schools and colleges, so madrasas and Sanskrit colleges are sufficient. Schools are filled with, even when the Indians have established the schools, and they were also shut down, they argue that the schools are filled with pupils from lower orders of the society, from miserable background. Educating such pupils is harmful to them. Do you wish to make them discontented with their cottage or their lot? So no English teaching school or no school teaching modern education was established by the colonial state for the first 95 years of the British rule. Between 1757 to 1852. 1852, they established a few schools only to get the East India Company the renewal of the contract during 1853. Now, contesting this, Scots argued, Indian peasantry is as industrious as the European peasantry. You see many letters written by the Scottish collectors. They argue this case. The people of India are as much a nation of shopkeepers as we ourselves. That's Munro. People of India are better administrators, altogether more efficient men of business, better judges, and understand laws better. Thomas Erskine Perry. Standard Scottish argument was Indians do not have any political freedom, no voice in administration, appoint them to higher position so that they will have administration, they'll be able to articulate what they want. So to enable Indians to join administration, establish modern educational institutions. So Charles Grant's intention to, introduce that 1 lakh rupees as education budget, compulsory education budget for British India, was also motivated by this factor. Now, subversion. At what level did they subvert? Orientalist and aristocracy introduced zamindari settlement in Bengal. We all have seen the repercussions of Bengal type zamindari settlement. Even after a lot of oppression and and the famines, Bengal rent bill was passed in 1883, but it could not be implemented because neither the British officers coming from the elite aristocratic English background were not in a, nor the zamindars wanted this to be implemented. So it was not implemented. Whereas Scottish officers introduced Raitwari settlement. In the Raitwari settlement, almost all the tillers of the land, the people who tilled the land, got they continued to be peasants. And of course, there was famine. Of course, there was peasant indebtedness, but they also addressed it. Deccan Agriculturist Relief Act in 1879 was drafted by William Wedderburn and M.G. Ranade. H.T. Prinsep, sent the directive, issued the directives to appoint only Brahmins to government posts. It was rejected by Robert Grant, a Scottish governor. It was rejected by Thomas Munro, another Scottish governor. So the government directives to remove children of Devadasis and from schools was rejected by DPI R.M. MacDonald. So this is a directive from the Governor General of India. And a DPI, Director of Public Instruction, stands up and says, I will not implement because this is wrong. Every child has a right to enter the school and get education. A.P. MacDonald, refused to remove 1 lakh girls in boys' schools, recommended by Hunter Commission. He refused to implement Hunter Commission, particularly this clause about removing 1 lakh girls. And the background to that was girls' schools were not very efficient because they had women teachers who were teaching the children, girls, the knitting and sewing and the embroidery and this kind of work. And the parents were very unhappy with that. Parents wanted their daughters also as educated as sons. So, and this was happening even in areas where Parda was practiced. Certain parts of Uttar Pradesh, certain parts of Madhya Pradesh, and large parts of Bengal Presidency, which practiced Parda, parents did not have any problem sending their daughters to, boys' school. They might be still practicing child marriage, marrying of girls at 14 or 15, but until then, they were ready to send their, daughters to boys' school. So now, how much did this idea, opinion differentiate, between the Scottish and English opinion? Now, 2 worldviews, that is regarding Bengal famine, 1769 to 1770. There was massive famine in Bengal. Historians have estimated anywhere between 2 to 8 million people died, depending on which history book you read. 2 to 8 million people died in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. Solution number 1 is given by Cornwallis, Governor General. That was creation of zamindari, large landholders, that is permanent settlement. Solution number 2, given by Charles Grant, a Scottish commoner, he says, educate Bengal peasants. They will be able to take care of themselves. Educated peasants would be skilled to make the most of soils and seasons, to improve the existing modes of culture, of pasturage, of rearing cattle, of defense against excesses of droughts and of rain, and thus to ameliorate the quality of the produce of the country. So let's go to the first personality I'm discussing today, Thomas Munro. Thomas Munro's father, Alexander Munro, was a small trader in Glasgow. He had borrowed heavily and invested in the American colonies. The Declaration of Independence by American colonies in 1776 led to complete ruin, complete bankruptcy. The family faced grinding and humiliating poverty. Father faced a threat of imprisonment from his creditors. As a result, all the 3 sons joined the army. So the people who were joining the army, there was hardly any example of people accumulating large sums of money, wealth, and going back to Scotland. They were the businessmen. It was businessmen who were making money, not the soldiers. So historian Bryant says that soldiers' chance of making fortune were non-existent. Whereas they ran a risk of early death from disease, only economic desperation can explain their enlistment. So salary of Bengal army was higher than the Madras army, and most of the Scots were sent to Madras army. So most of the English came to the Bengal army. In the 18th century, a soldier's pay was 10 rupees without accommodation. And the working conditions were also equally bad. And Munro wrote to his sister, I walked from sunrise to sunset without any refreshment other than water. I have traversed on foot in different directions almost every part of the country between Vishakhapatnam and Madura, a distance of 800 miles. I used cartridge pouch as a pillow, my coat as a blanket, and slept in tents. He would pitch a tent outside a village and sleep there rather than paying the rent to somebody to stay in a proper accommodation. Thomas and Alexander in India, Daniel in Jamaica put food on the table in Glasgow. The situation was that desperate. He had to save money to marry off their sister, and all the three brothers had to save money to marry off their sisters. Munro became fluent in Tamil, Telugu, and Kannada languages, interacted very closely with the local population, so he was transferred from the army to civil administration because of his linguistic skills. Richard Wellesley ordered the permanent settlement should be implemented in Madras Presidency. Bombay did not exist at that point of time. Bombay Presidency came under the British in 1880. Munro, as a collector, a 28-year-old young collector, questioned and fought against it. And also, we have to understand, why these people were fighting. And the desperation at home. If he had lost the job, there would have been a bigger consequence for his family living in Glasgow. But nonetheless, they took chance. And it was not just Munro. There are many people who did this. And, Munro, I have researched well. That is why I'm bringing out this, this personality ahead. So he lived in tents, pitched outside villages for months, conducting survey in 40 degrees Celsius. For someone coming from Scotland, staying in a collector's bungalow, by this time he had become a collector and, he could have lived in a big bungalow, and then just implementing permanent settlement would have been the easiest thing. He said, no, I will not implement. And a group of Scottish officers together, they bond together and then decided to implement something different. Arthur Wellesley reminded him in 1799, you are not popular among senior officials. So Munro stood up not only to Cornwallis, to Richard Wellesley, to Gilbert Manto, Francis Hastings. These are four of the most powerful governor generals. India had 44 governor generals, viceroys, governor generals together, 44, 45 people. I mean, if we leave Mountbatten, 44 people we have. Of them, few of them were very powerful and few of them were all right. But these were four most powerful governor generals and he stood up to all of them. Munro opposed, in the letters that he writes to the government, his seniors, he says, he opposed the arrogance of officers who passed the laws without knowing how it affected the people of India. We forget that one great principle, the freedom of people from which they derive their influence, does not exist here. Munro suggested to the higher authorities, respect traditional institutions of Indians. All regulations should in the beginning conform as nearly as possible to the existing customs of the country and be changed progressively with those customs. So he was also one of the first officers who declared that the British rule in India is temporary. He suggested to the higher authorities, the British rule in India should be in India until the natives shall frame a regular government for themselves, and to conduct and preserve it. Whenever such time shall arrive, it will probably best for both countries that British control over India should be gradually withdrawn. This is 1820s, and the Scottish officers are talking about independent India. To exclude natives, in the same letter he says, to exclude natives from higher administrative position is both politically and morally wrong. We must treat the natives with courtesy. We must place the confidence in them. We must render their official situation respectable. Now he was appointed as governor of Madras after 40 years of service, and he was governor for 7 years. And when he was appointed as a governor of Madras, H.T. Prinsep wrote to him saying that in the Hindu tradition, only Brahmins have access to education and employment, and only Brahmins should be appointed to government positions. Munro says, I have lived in this place for 40 years and I know village by village information. No such thing exists. So he ordered a survey because Prinsep did not agree. He ordered a survey of indigenous schools. And that survey was conducted between 1822 to 1823. And this survey became a model for further surveys in all other parts of India. And I'll come to the survey that was conducted in Uttar Pradesh. I'll just come to it in a minute. So the meticulous data of 11,691 schools from 5 linguistic regions, that is Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, and Odia, very clearly states that out of 1,42,369 Hindu students, Brahmin students formed only 30,479. Rest of them, the large chunk, the large majority group was Shudras, and there were 22,794 students who were from the caste that were below the Shudras, which included a number of Dalit, castes. So we have 10,864 Muslim students, and these Muslim students are not from madrasa. These students are studying in Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, indigenous schools. Why the number of Muslim students are less here is mainly because the Muslims formed anywhere between 3 to 5% of the population in Madras Presidency. Now, Monroe proposed the establishment of 300 Tahsildari schools, that is sub-district level, and these are primary schools, and 40 secondary schools. He said that 20 secondary schools should teach Persian plus modern curriculum, and 20 should teach modern South Indian languages and modern curriculum. Monroe argued whatever expense the government may incur in the education of the people will be repaid by improvement of the country. There was resistance from the Orientalists. Monroe could establish only 81 Tahsildari and 20 collectorate schools before his death in 1827. In 1827, Monroe's term as governor had ended. He had already sent his wife and son back to England, and he was waiting for his, the another person to come to, hand over the charge. In the meantime, he came to know that cholera had broken out in Rayalaseema. So he went there, though he was no longer technically the governor. He went there to supervise the relief operations there. And he contracted cholera, and he died in a tent pitched outside the village Pattikonda. And his life in India had begun 47 years before in a tent, and his life also ended in a tent. And people of that area collected 30,000 rupees and wanted to establish a traveler's rest house as a memorial to Monroe. Orientalists opposed and said it would become a shrine to Monroe in the manner of a Hindu shrine. So it was not established. The post-Monroean educational policies, the 3 governors who succeeded him, Lushington, Frederick Adams, and John Elphinstone, they completely destroyed the kind of administrative system that Monroe had built over a period of 47 years. Monroe and a group of Scottish officers had built. The Orientalist Rawlinson was made in charge of education department. He immediately ordered an inquiry. So this becomes the theme, like whenever they do not want something, they order an inquiry and try to get the result that they want. Same thing happens in North India. I'll just come to that. Out of 40 collectors and sub-collectors, 37 supported Monroe schools. Only 3 supported the Orientalists, who declared that Monroe schools are a failure as there are no pupils from respectable background. That means nobody from upper classes of the society, nobody from rich background. On 18th May 1836, Frederick Adams abolished 101 schools. John Elphinstone, who succeeded Frederick Adams, argued that the light must touch the mountain tops before it could pierce to the levels and depths. This is filtration theory. It is the elites who should get education first. It is the upper classes who should get education first. But then we attribute filtration theory to Macaulay. There was massive protest by Indians. On 11th November 1839, a petition in English was drafted by Ghazalo Lakshminarayan Suchetti, Narayan Swami Naidu, Sri Srinivasa Pillai. All the 3 of them are non-Brahmins. And signed by 70,000 persons. Even in 21st century, to get 70,000 people to actually sign a petition is impossible. I don't know whether anyone was able to do this kind of, they're getting signatures, 70,000 persons in the past 10, 15 years. I'm not sure. And they are signed in, Telugu and Tamil languages. And when I came to know about this in Chennai archives, I didn't believe my eyes. Is it possible? This is 18th century. The early part of 18th century we are talking about, not even the second half, 19th century. It's not even the second part of the 19th century where political movements had taken place. No, 70,000 people. Only when I saw the photograph, then I realized it is true. So they argue in this petition, we are the people of this country, inheriting this land for thousands of generations. From its industry, its wealth is supplied. By our arms, it is defended from foreign foes. By our loyal obedience to the established government, its peace and safety is maintained. If the diffusion of education be among the highest benefits and duties of a government, we the people petition for its share. We seek not education that depends on charity. We shall take pride in contributing according to our means to so noble a cause. And this is the picture of the 70,000 signatures that is there in the British Library. To counter this, Elphinstone wrote an education minute on 12 December 1839. He declared Monroe schools have produced nothing but disappointment. He announced the establishment of Madras University 20 years before the actual establishment. That was essentially to divert the attention of the people. Neither Elphinstone nor his successors established even a single primary school until 1852. For 17 years, Madras Presidency was without any government schools. Everywhere, people cherished Monroe's memory. And even in 1870s, they still named their sons as Monroe Lappan. So the kind of, the way the people remembered Monroe. Hundreds of people who studied in the schools, Monroe schools, during 1826 to 1835, went on to establish informal schools throughout the presidency. And we get to know the information. We do not know how many exactly, but then when the Indian political leadership, the Indian social reformers, when they write their biographies, they say that I studied in a school that was maintained by a tailor. I studied in a school, maintained by somebody. So these informal routes of learning English also extensively existed, and I have a research paper on that. Now let us come to North India. This is where A.O. Hume worked. A.O. Hume, Monroe doesn't have a very strong ideological understanding of politics. He only says that this is right, this is wrong. This kind of administration, British administration is wrong. We have to involve Indians and so on. Whereas Hume is very clear. I have resolved to oppose tooth and nail to the last drop of my blood and the last hour of my life, he said in 1890, when there was opposition from the colonial state, from the senior officials to Indian National Congress. This is what Hume said. Joseph Hume, A.O. Hume's father, was son of a fisherman. He was from Montrose in Scotland. He had worked in North India and he was fluent in Persian and Hindustani. He returned to England in 1808 and he became a member of parliament. He was member of parliament for next 37 years. And he was the one who introduced a number of radical legislation for Britain, supporting the establishment of trade unions, freedom of press. Even he argued for reduction in the allowance to the royal family, secular education. He also argued for judicial and administrative reforms for India. Joseph Hume in 1831 proposed that 4 Indian members of parliament should be added to the House of Commons, elected by all those Indians eligible for jury service in India. That is, educated Indians should elect 4 members of the 4 members in the British Parliament. The proposal was, of course, defeated. Hume was born and raised in London. He completely embraced Scottish radicalism. And he wrote, I still cling to the political creed of my father. Like my father before me, I am a radical. Hume's heroes were Muir and Palmer, our Scottish martyrs. This is what he referred to them. Thomas Muir and Thomas Palmer were Scottish political reformers. They were charged with sedition and they were arrested and transported to Australia. Hume defined radicalism as an unselfish and persistent effort to secure the amelioration of a lot of our less fortunate fellows, to raise and comfort the downtrodden and the oppressed and suffering. This is radical creed. At the age of 20, he came to India in 1849 and he became the collector of Etawah district in 1854, and he went on to be collector till 1867. This particular incident is very important for me as a historian. If Hume had not come to Etawah, and if as a historian of education, if I had depended upon the available records there, Henry Stuart Reid, who was an Orientalist, was sent to the 8 districts of Uttar Pradesh, which were under the British administration. Now, the background to that is Macaulay left India in 1838, January 17th, 1838. Immediately, Macaulay's minute was removed and Auckland's education minute was brought into place. Auckland very clearly said that we are not going to fund either the Oriental institutions nor English institutions. And, completely shut down all the schools that Macaulay had established, which were done subsequently. So the government took a decision to help the indigenous vernacular schools. So there was already data which Monroe had collected. There was data which was collected in Bombay Presidency as well as Bengal Presidency. Only Uttar Pradesh, the northwestern province, data was not available to them. So they sent this Orientalist, H.S. Reid, to collect the data for northwestern province. So this is what H.S. Reid says. The people of India cling with unreflecting reverence to the Bap Dada ka Dastur, with whom custom serves for reason, have always regarded with blind distrust and suspicion every scheme set on foot by the government for their amelioration. People are suspicious of government intentions. In parts of Etawah, people thought that the children in schools would be offered up as propitiatory sacrifice after the completion of Ganga Canal. Educational officers were thought as the emissaries of missionaries. These are very strong words. Unfortunately for H.S. Reid, Hume was posted to Etawah within 2 years. So he was posted in 1854 as a collector. As soon as he took over the charge, he wrote a letter to all the landholders, asking them to contribute 1% of the cess for education. This was if a zamindar is, zamindari was not there, but more of bigger landlords. If they were paying 100 rupees as tax, they had to pay 101 rupees. That is 1% would be used for education. Every zamindar in the district, except one, came for a meeting. They signed the contract and many of them paid the first installment on the spot. They came with money in their pocket. This shows that how enthusiastic people were and what kind of report H.S. Reid had filed. And others paid within few days. 32 schools were opened in 2 months. Between 1854 to 1857, 181 primary schools and 1 high school was established. When the higher officials opposed it, Hume wrote, I will put within the reach of every talented lad, however poor, the attainment of first-rate education. All schools had libraries. All school committees had Indian members. All school committees had only Indian members. It was, Hume was only a visiting person. A Muslim in Mayanpuri asked Hume, why should our children remain idle a whole day every week because it happens to be a religious festival with you? This is giving Sunday as a holiday to schools. The people were so enthusiastic about education. And what happened within 2 years? Nothing great happened. The way the Orientalists projected India, the way the Scots opposed it, they contested it. So the schools taught Hindi, Urdu, arithmetic up to compound interest, double rules of 3 and geography. Hume argued further The foundation of any healthy and comprehensive scheme of education must be laid among the masses. I would devote our chief care, our last energies to sow thickly and widely through the land good elementary schools for the people. The schools had upper caste, OBC, and Dalit children. In few places, there was opposition to the admission of Dalit children. Hume said, no compromise. If you do not admit every child who seeks admission, then I will not support the school. So as a compromise was reached between the school committees and Hume, and separate classrooms were provided for Dalit children. These were only in few schools, not in all schools. Some zamindars were so enthusiastic, they bought textbooks and they read them and they conducted the examination. On May 1st, 1857, 9 days before the outbreak of the revolt of 1857, there were 7,000 students in these schools. The rebel soldiers did not attack these schools. They harmed no hair of any man's head. They only told us, this is what Hume wrote, told us that they could no longer obey us. Next morning, allowed us all to ride quietly off through their lines to Agra. During the revolt, when no British administration existed in Etawah between 10th May 1857 to October 1858, 31 schools functioned without any disruption. People protected school buildings. Zamindars paid teachers' salaries, even though when there was no British administration. The remaining schools reopened in July 1858 before the end of revolt in October 1858. During May 1856 to May 1861, the people of Etawah district contributed more than 1,10,000 rupees towards the salaries of schoolmasters and new school buildings. They also contributed 5,500 rupees to repair the Agra College, which was destroyed during the revolt. After the revolt, Hume started an English journal. This was essentially for the students who were passing out of these schools. In English, it was People's Friend, and in Hindi, it was Prajahit, and in Urdu, it is Mohib Iraya. I'm not pronouncing it correctly. I'm aware of that. So you read it. So, and it was a fortnightly with 31,000 circulation. Late 1861, Hume left for England on medical leave. He had not taken any leave in the previous 11 years. He left for England. By this time, H.S. Reed, who had filed that report on Etawah, had become Director of Public Instruction. Immediately, Hume left in November 1861. Immediately, the inquiry was ordered to all Hume schools. Kempson, Inspector of Schools, and Pollock, officiating collector of Etawah, conducted the inquiry during the foggy winter January 1862. And they found only 50% of children in school, and they called it fraud, And students had studied arithmetic up to compound interest and double rules of 3, but they were examined in cube root in decimals. Obviously, all students failed because that had not been, taught. Hume schools were declared as failure, most inefficient and disorganized. The education department took over the schools. Because they were inefficient and disorganized, the education department started shutting them down one by one. People protested. They wrote to Hume in England. Hume again wrote to Charles Wood. Charles Wood did not support Hume. He supported H.S. Reed. Reed, who had 11 years earlier declared that the educational officers were thought as emissaries of missionaries, handed over the one room in Central English School to a missionary for scriptural classes on Sunday. Kempson, Inspector of Schools, imposed restrictions on the circulation of Hume's journals. In 1863, Lakshman Singh, who edited Hindi edition, was transferred to Bulandshahr. In 1864, Jawaharlal, the editor and owner of the press, he was also the editor of Urdu version of the journal, was forced to relocate to Agra. Hume returned in January 1863. He refused promotion, stayed on till 1867 to revive the schools, but he could not because they had already been shut down and it was very, very ruthless way of doing things. When they shut down Monroe schools, they just stopped giving salaries to teachers. So many a time the schools were taken over by the local population, and they gave salaries to the teachers. Schools continued. But here, they sold the school buildings and completely destroyed it so that no school can be revived. Only Etawah Central School survived. Hume was transferred out finally in 1867, and he had a saving of 7,200 rupees, which he handed it over to Etawah Central School. And the collector, as a collector of Etawah, was the first and last post he held that directly dealt with the people. Government was aware of his popularity among Indians, so he kept him isolated from public. He was made Commissioner of Customs for Northwestern Province, where he abolished 2,500 miles long customs barrier. He was later transferred to, he was posted as a Secretary of Agriculture. He wrote on agrarian distress and supported radical legislation of Deccan Agricultural Relief Act, agricultural banks, and the government shut down the agricultural department. The influential British officers considered him as a traitor, called on the government to deport Hume for insubordination. Finally, Hume retired from service in 1882. Hume realized that scattered individuals, however capable, however well-meaning, are powerless. What is needed is an organization. And that organization should, the constitution of the proposed organization should be democratic, free from personal ambitions, to promote mental, moral, social, and political regeneration of the people of India. On 1st March 1883, he wrote an open letter to the graduates of Calcutta University, called upon these young men to build a strong Indian nation. And it resonated not just among the graduates of Calcutta University, but across India. So as a result, Indian National Congress was established in 1885 by people from every walks of life and every corner of India. Hume was aware of the fact that the British elites would project this development negatively in the British press. So he wrote to them directly, to the leading journals and newspapers in advance about the proposed organization. He also contacted the British radicals and liberals like Charles Bradlaugh and William Digby and others. And then, finally, along with Dadabhai Navroji and W.C. Banerjee, set up on 27 July 1889, the British Committee of the Indian National Congress in London. Hume and fellow Scot William Wedderburn spent thousands of pounds of their pension funds in campaigns on behalf of Indian National Congress in Britain. Hume left India in 1894 due to ill health. Before leaving India, he asked Indians to promise him two things. One, to remove child marriage, and second, educate every boy and girl in the country. And his final parting words were, I have spent 45 years of my life in India. India has become part of me, my thought, my hopes. I have lived my life amongst you. The welfare of the nation is the highest law. India should grow great and glorious, that her people should become free and happy. Farewell, dear friends, farewell. I have not succeeded in securing for you any appreciable fraction of what I hope to win for you. The land I have loved will surely someday win all that I have hoped for her. Thank you.
Wow, Professor Rao, I mean, you opened our eyes, and many of among us who are not so familiar with the history of education in India, early India. I mean, today, looking at Monroe and Hume as our savior in whatever way possible. So let's have some concluding remarks by Professor Mazhar Hussain, and then we will have the question and answer session. Thank you very much. Mazhar sir.
Hello, everybody. Let me thank, first of all, the organizer of this talk by Professor Rao, especially Dr. Raziuddin Saab. Thank you very much. It was really a wonderful talk and enriching. As to me, who has been dabbling in the history of education, she has dealt with the complexities, which is generally not dealt by most of the historians. The problem is she has touched upon, or rather explored, one very, very important aspect in her talk. That is the question or problem of historiography of education in India. How the history of education has hitherto been viewed by different historians of education. This is for the first time, to my knowledge, that Dr. Rao has explored an area which had been unexplored. That is, we have been taking all Britishers or all those who came from England as a homogeneous and monolithic group. She has looked at them from an angle which has not been used before. That is how a policy, whether it is administrative or economic or educational, how a policy is shaped by a person who has a particular ideology, who belongs to a particular class, who has a particular experience. So these play as factors in shaping a policy. This is what has been done by Dr. Professor Rao. It has not been done before. She has generally dealt with two regions. North, that is very close to Delhi, that region she has taken up, and south. But there are some regions in north and northeast, like Calcutta and say Banaras and Delhi, where these Orientalists succeeded and implemented their policies. Banaras College is one example. Delhi College is another example. Delhi College, so a kind of parallel between the efforts, educational efforts made by a Scottish, whom she calls radical Scottish, and the kind of educational endeavors Orientalists made and implemented in Delhi College and in Sanskrit College, Banaras. A kind of parallel between, these two may be drawn so that we can have a clearer picture of the kind of education was being planned for people of India. It is certainly an irony that people throughout India wanted modern education. This is what is clear from our paper. This is what is the reality. This is what the colonial archives basically shows. But the Orientalist contrarily wanted to give a kind of education which had already been there in India. So people were acquiring that kind of education. So it's basically a complex situation which has been so lucidly dealt in a paper in this paper by Professor Rao. I don't think I have to say much about this. His paper is so clear, and I'm not going to add anything more to the paper. Just to, I would like to just say one thing, that it is certainly an addition in the field of history of education in India, and certainly a very, very enlightening paper, especially to a person who has been in this area or dabbling in this field for some time. There's so many things that she has just presented are new to many of us, which we did not know. We knew what Orientalists were doing. We knew what a Scottish, other section of Scottish radicals were doing. But we are not aware of the kind of background she has presented. We are not aware of the kind of experiences they had. We are not aware of the kind of ideology they had. We were not aware of the kind of education they had. So all these things, how all these things shape a policy. And policy, which we all know, shape our destinations. So I must congratulate and thank Professor Rao to give such an enlightening talk. And I thank you, the organizer, especially Dr. Raziuddin Sahab, to give me an opportunity to talk about this. Thank you very much.
So you see, we are really indebted to what we learned today. Totally very fundamentally new things. I'm sure many questions will come. Before that, we just have an announcement for upcoming Saturday. It's a totally different, as you know, we are a variety, we put all kind of theme. It is on, which is also important, it's on Shad, the very famous music director of Indian film industry, who is also a poet, known as a poet. And our Danish Iqbal Sahab, as usual, for the last Saturday of every month, he presents on a blending of literature and entertainment. So stay tuned to that. And now over to question and answer session moderated by Dr. Rafat Hussain, our co-host. So stay tuned, Rafat, now.
Thank you, Dr. Raziuddin, and thank you to the speakers, all the speakers. It was a wonderful talk. And thanks again for Professor Rai, Professor Phadwaj, and Professor Hussain. So let's begin the question and answer session. You can raise your digital hand, or you can put your comment or question in the chat box. So let's begin with the chat box. There is one question by the name Samsung ESM. So the question is, I'm a little bit curious about who were the teachers in these Monroe or Hume model schools. Do you think that the Scottish education background led him to fight for the Indian cause? I mean, Scots had a history of tussle with England, so to say.
Yeah.
Please go ahead, Professor.
Okay, thank you. The teachers were the teachers of indigenous schools. The indigenous schools in India, whichever linguistic area, whether it is Hindi, Urdu in the north, or Bengali, Odia, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Marathi, they gave very high quality education, both literacy and numeracy. So most of the teachers in these schools were Indian teachers who were already working in indigenous schools, or the students who had passed out of indigenous schools. Only these schools which taught higher education, for example high school, like physics, chemistry, mathematics, and so on, they were essentially either Anglo-Indians or somebody who had learned English. Otherwise, majority of teachers were either teachers of indigenous schools or products of indigenous schools.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rai. Next question is, what do you think of the book, The Beautiful Tree by Dharmpal and its veracity? and his contribution. This is from by the name iPhone.
Okay. Now, the problem with Dhampal is Gandhi made a statement, I think in 1929 or 1930, that there was, the India had a wonderful system of education, which is correct. And it was a beautiful tree and it was destroyed by the British, which is wrong. Second part of the assumption is wrong. But Dharmapal tries to get the data to prove that point. So in that, he makes a major mistake. That is, he collected the data for Madras presidency. Of course, that was not the final data. The data sent by the collectors he has collected, but then the data that is collated, he has not collected that data. Sorry, it's the other way around. The final version he has collected, but not the ones that were sent by the collectors, which are different. He nominally picks up some information from William Adams' report, but he completely ignores the data that was collected in Bombay presidency. Why? Because Bombay came under the British administration in 1818. The earliest data was collected in 1820. Within 2 years of British administration, which the British administration could not have, affected. Also by a person who was a Marathi speaking English or British officer who was born and raised in India, by the beginning of 19th century, several generation British officers were, born and raised in India, for over a century. So the data was collected very clearly, gives an, idea that all castes had equal access to education. So he doesn't use the Bombay data because that is uncomfortable, because he wants to prove that the British destroyed. So here in Bombay, they didn't have time to destroy. It was only 2 years, but the data is identical. The data for Madras presidency, the data for Bombay presidency is identical. And the second important thing, he says the British destroyed, that was the intention of the book. So he doesn't look at the data after 1840. When the colonial administration adopted 70,000 indigenous vernacular schools, gave regular salary to teachers, gave pension to teachers, and made them into government primary schools. Same teacher, same set of students are, the teachers are getting salaries, pensions, and the students are getting textbooks. In indigenous vernacular schools, the textbooks were only in the hands of Indian teachers because they were manuscripts. And now the colonial government printed the manuscript and the students could purchase the books. It was in the hands of students. So Dharanpal doesn't look at the data after 1840. So this is the reason when you go with a political agenda, when you go with an ideological motive, true history cannot be written. It's an ideologically motivated history.
Thank you, Professor Roy.
I'm Rao. I'm a South Indian. I'm Rao. I'm not a Bengali. I'm not Roy.
No, I am
sorry to
Rao.
point
Sorry, I am Rao.
Thank you.
Certainly Rao. Okay, so the next one is Maria Williams, please.
Oh, hello. Thank you very much, Parimala. And I just wanted to pick up on Professor Hussein's points about the originality of your methodology, because it seems to me it has lessons for many historians of education working in other areas. Are you able to share with us just a few points about how you came to develop your methodology?
The methodology that I use is historical method. Analyzing the document according to the historical method. And I am a neo-Rankian. And of course, I get criticized for following Ranke. Ranke has been criticized for various other reasons. Okay. So I followed that. And even for me, it was a surprise. The kind of history we were taught. And when I went to the archives, and why this person is talking like this? So I just couldn't figure out. And only when I went into their background and, somebody commented that, England was ruling Scotland. So many a time when I read Munro's minutes, minutes on education, which are very lengthy ones, 15-page, 20-page long minutes, many of the paragraphs, when I read, I don't know whether he's talking on behalf of Indians or he's talking on behalf of Scottish. As a Scotsman, he is opposing the English, or as an officer in India who is opposing the colonial, ideas. So the methodology that I use is a historical method.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. And Aftab Khan, please. Aftab Khan.
Hello, this is Aftab. Thank you, madam, for the wonderful talk. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
My question might be slightly out of place, but please allow me to ask
Please.
it anyway. Yeah.
Please.
My question is basically, what is the gain of Monroe and huge praiseworthy efforts when we end up with a hateful Hindu supremacist intellectual India? I mean, where one group, especially Brahmins, look down upon other group, especially Muslim, Dalit, and OBC. So where did the modern education fail India actually?
See, if I look at the overall data for British India, Hindus and Muslims, upper caste and lower caste, all of them were on the same page as far as education was concerned until 1870. Education in indigenous schools had students from all sections of the society, both the rich, poor, lower caste, upper caste. In UP, there were Dalit students in indigenous schools. Indigenous schools teaching Hindi and Urdu, there were Dalit students. There was no opposition to that. Opposition begins in 1870 when they realized that these students, the main difference is that in the traditional Indian system, whoever might be educated, he is working for somebody. So it's a pattern-client relationship exists. So they are not powerful. However educated a person might be, the person is not powerful. When they start becoming officers in colonial administration, imagine somebody, a poor Indian who becomes a magistrate, particularly Pabna insurrection and the peasant revolts in 1860s. All these zamindars had to go and stand in front of this poor village, whichever caste, upper caste, OBC, whichever caste person becomes a collector, at least deputy collector. Collectors were British, deputy collectors were Indians. And many of them become magistrate. They had to go and stand in front of them. So the opposition to the education of the poor, not respectable, begins in 1870 itself. Then it turns into the lower caste. So until 1870, we do not find any kind of opposition. And the opposition begins there. Education is seen as an empowering. And the Scots also openly argue that education is an empowering tool. How do we empower a peasant? How do we empower a common man? It is through education. So education was seen as pursuit of knowledge in Indian tradition. Now it was seen as an empowering tool. Once you are empowered, you will dictate terms to us, which the feudal mindset and particularly the landed gentry resented. So that is what continued during freedom movement, and that is what continues in post-independent India. Why we did not pass the compulsory education bill in 1911 when everybody wanted it? It was opposed by the representative of zamindars in the Imperial Legislative Council. It was defeated by these people.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Fayyaz Ahmad, was there any impact of Scottish radicalism on princely state?
Yes, it was there. Many of these places had, the teachers who were from the Scottish background, from Scotland. And these people taught these radical ideas. In fact, the first person to teach David Hume in India, probably in the entire Asia, was David Drummond. He opened a school in Calcutta and he was teaching David Hume in 1913 1813 onwards, he taught there. So in princely states also, many of them opened schools, or many of them became principals of the schools or teachers in schools, and they taught radicalism.
Thank you. Prithvi Raj Thakur, could you please tell more about the Chennai petition of 70,000 signs or signatures?
The petition very clearly asked the government to reopen Monroe schools, whereas the government is opposed to it, and the government even refuses to recognize. I really do not know who sent the petition to the directors of the East India Company. As a result, we have a copy here. And, like British maintained every record in three copies. One was at the local level, one was at the national level, and one was sent to Britain as a copy, which we find in the British Library. I could not find this petition in the Chennai archives. The almost 3 or 4 years, and each year's petition was this high. They were sending petitions for various things. And the very myth that was created during freedom movement was that everything in India was oral. The Indian tradition, oral was there. Everything was oral, and, writing, as Krishna Kumar and others say, writing was imposed by the British. No, India had produced, 10 languages. Schools were conducted, indigenous schools were conducted in 10 languages, 11 script. And 500 texts were used. Where is oral this thing? So it was a written culture. So, and writing petition was taught in indigenous schools, which I have discussed in my book Routledge Companion. I mean, this thing doesn't happen in any other part of the world. Writing petition was taught in indigenous schools. So you will find petitions for anything and everything, reaching the government, at least until 1860s. So this particular petition very strongly argued that the Monroe School should be reopened. If the government doesn't have money, we are ready to give the money. So, but then the colonial state or the governors refused to do it.
Thank you, Professor. The next question is from Ibadur Ansari, please. Sorry. Ibadur Ansari, you raised your hand, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor Rao. You have given us the tons of information of the thoughts that have been lingering in mind and trying to find out from so many of people all over India or the world. I'm from Bombay. I was born in Bombay, but belonged to North India. Our parents were from Allahabad, who was migrated to Bombay in 40s. And I was educated in Bombay. But when I I was going to my medical college, that was also called Grant Medical College at JJ Hospital.
Yes.
So we know the history of it. But on the way, there was a big school called Hume High School. And I used to see that this is a big school, but this is not as smart as I see on the fort areas where the pre-medical education. The students are not as smart. They look, from the lower class, but the school was huge. And just now when you said about him, I noticed that it was established in 1877, such a long time ago. And recently I got my cousin brothers. His daughter is going to get married in that hall. So there seemed to be a big hall. But that is how that school setup is.
Yeah.
What I have been, because for last 30, I'm now retired as a urologist surgeon in Abu Dhabi. And so last 25, 30 years, I have been very much thinking and trying to help for education, what education can do for the country, for the community, for those who are economically or financially in need. So in that, I always used to think, why the people of South India are more educated, even irrespective of the class or religion, and the Calcutta. In the North, the Sir Syed Ahmad Khan established Aligarh Muslim University. I visited it many times. I know the people there, and I could find what could be the reason. And I could find also why there was a fall in education, why we didn't pick up the education, the particular Muslim community or others. So you have given a historical aspect of why the education was made to be available through the Scottish and other. You have given tons of evidence by which everybody, whoever is interested in the family, that they want to educate their children, or in the community, or in the country, they should read and listen to your talk. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Raziyuddin.
Thank
Can
you.
I reply to him?
Yes, please.
Please.
You talked about North India. See, the basic difference between North and South is mainly because of the Scottish officers. North was considered very fertile, so the English officers went to North India, and South was considered dry, arid, poor. So the Scottish officers were thrown in there. So it was advantageous for us. Now, secondly, about Macaulay, which there is 100 years of, what can I say, writings about him, which are absolutely inaccurate. It was Macaulay who first questioned the Orientalists, because Orientalists had established colleges in Delhi, Agra, Banaras, and Calcutta. He said that you are educating only the urban population. What about the rural population? So he was the first to raise the issue that Patna is, Bihar is educationally backward. He established a high school in Patna. He established a high school in Azamgarh. High school means they also have, primary schools leading up to high schools. Azamgarh, Gorakhpur, Shahjahanpur, Agra, of course, Agra it was there, Farrukhabad, Etawah, Ghazipur, Meerut. He established these schools in rural areas. And all the schools were shut down by colonial state after Macaulay left. So North lost out because of this. Only Patna High School was not shut down because the successor of Macaulay, there is a law member, Charles Hay Cameron, he protected Patna High School, but then that was also shut down after he left India.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Myrnal, a question from Myrnal by the name Myrnal. Did Scottish take revenge from Britain in the shadow of Indians?
Looks like that. Some of them did, actually. So that's what I said. When Monroe is writing, I cannot figure out whether he is angry as a Scotsman against the English, or is he talking on behalf of Indians? Many a time when you just take out these words like natives, Indians, these words from the paragraph, it's very difficult to make out what they are doing. But wherever they went, they did it. It's not just India. In fact, many people who supported the American War of Independence were Scotsmen.
Thank you. The next question is from Bala Subramaniam Shiv Kumar. And can you talk about Alexander Duff and John Anderson from Calcutta and Madras? Can you also tell the impact that the missionary school had when government English schools were shut down?
Yeah. Now, very little information is available about Anderson. Alexander Duff, of course, we have, but very little is available about Anderson. Now, the thing is that, again, what applies to the English officers and Scottish officers, same thing applies to English missionaries and Scottish missionaries. English missionaries were consistently opposed to the introduction of English and modern curriculum in India. The Scottish missionaries were the first to introduce English and modern curriculum. So there is continuous opposition, and only by the beginning of 20th century, when they realized that students are not coming to their missionary schools, then they agree to introduce English.
Anderson.
Anderson, we don't have much information. He was the one who established the Madras Christian
General
College.
Assembly School. Yes, ma'am.
Madras Christian College.
Yes, yes.
We don't have much information, but in the absence of any government institution, it was the Madras Christian College which gave higher education to Indians.
Tariq Faruqi, please.
Ma'am,
Yes, thank you very much, Professor, for a very scholarly presentation. This is just an observation, not a question. We all knew about Macaulay and very superficial information about the English educators, but you've done a very scholarly presentation about the Scottish educators in India and how they were different and how their emphasis was so different. Thank you very much. We learned a lot, and this really means a great deal for most of us on Saturdays like this, that we learn something new every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment, Tariq. The next one is Anjum Altaf. Can you say something about the medium of instructions in these schools? When did the medium shift to English and why?
The colonial state consistently opposed English as a medium of instruction. I have one full chapter, the various laws they brought out, various policy documents they brought out opposing this. This was also because of one important thing, that Indian society was a literate society. And Indians were learning English through informal means because colonial state did not establish schools, and they were reading radical European philosophies. So Thomas Paine's work, which influenced both French Revolution and American War of Independence, the largest number of copies were bought in India. That actually frightened the colonial state, the senior officials as well as the missionaries. So, and this was the reason why they opposed. So we do not find any government document that declares, except Macaulay's Minute, that English should be the medium of instruction. After Macaulay left, all the schools were shut down. After Monroe died, all the schools were shut down. And Bombay Presidency, 8 English schools, they were private schools, were saved only because of Thomas Erskine Perry, another radical Scottish judge, saved these schools. And finally, when they established universities, government did not have a single college. In Calcutta, they had to take over Hindu College, which was established by Ram Mohan Roy and other social reformers, and a couple of other colleges to establish Calcutta University. Elphinstone College, people think that it was established by the British. No, it was established by the people of Bombay Presidency. They collected nearly 2 lakh rupees and established that institution just because somebody imposed that name, that entire thing I have discussed in Beyond Macaulay book. So they did not have a single institution. They opposed it even after that. In fact, Curzon says, when Indians are becoming too radical, they are asking for freedom. He says that English should not be taught in India. English should be banned. So from the day one until independence, or until 1935, when the Government of India Act handed over the administration to Indians, all that you find in the archives is policy documents which opposes the introduction of English in India and asks the government to shut down the existing English medium schools. This is because the Indians are radical, reading. And when the colonial state started shutting down the Macaulay schools, Dwarkanath Tagore met the Governor General Ellenborough and asked him not to do it. So Ellenborough told Dwarkanath Tagore that if these gentlemen, that is Macaulay, Trevelyan and others, if they succeed in what they want to do, establish English medium schools or modern schools across India, we will not be here for 3 months. We will be kicked out of India within 3 months. British rule will end in 3 months. So there should be no English education. And what Macaulay was advocating was not purely English. It was Anglo vernacular. That's why all his schools were called Anglo vernacular. So the schools taught the schools taught Persian. They taught Indian languages like Urdu, Hindi, and Sanskrit. and modern curriculum. So they were called Anglo vernacular schools, not entirely English medium schools. So English medium schools, even the missionaries adopted English medium schools, or rather started English medium schools post revolt of 1857. If there is time, I can explain that in 2 minutes.
Please,
the British rule in India was class-based rule, the elite upper class rule. So they looked down upon the poor Europeans and Eurasians, that is mixed population in India. So they were not considered worthy of administrative responsibilities. So if they become either Hindu or Muslim, they could apply for government jobs. So in Hinduism, there was no conversion. So what they did was that they converted to Islam, many of them, and they became government servants. But they were nominal Muslims. They were not actually practicing Muslims, but they had a Muslim name. But after the revolt of 1857, suddenly government realizes that this is a whole group of poor European and Eurasian people who are into what they call, I quote, Mohammedanism. They have to be rescued back. So they asked the missionaries to open English medium schools. So they did open, but to run a school, you need a certain number of people. They did not have enough. So they had to admit Indian students also. That is why you find Indians proficient in English emerging by the end of 19th century.
Thank you so much. Bala Subramaniam, you raised the hand again. I had asked your question.
Yes. Actually,
is there anything else?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead quickly.
Can you hear
please.
me?
Yeah.
Yes,
Sure.
Yes, please.
Yeah, a pleasure talking to you, ma'am, first of all.
Thank you.
I've always been wanting to meet you because I am working on Scottish missionaries education in Madras and stuff like that.
Okay. I would
so
love to get
happy
in
to
touch
have,
with you.
Very much, ma'am. I'm doing my PhD in Madras University, ma'am. Very happy to have spoken to you. I've been trying to meet you in for the past 2 years in Indian History Congress, South Indian History Congress, everywhere. But
I don't go there. I don't go there.
Oh. All right, ma'am. Sorry,
I don't go there.
Yeah, fine. But I didn't know where to look for you. But my question is, Charles Trevelyan also played a role in influencing Macaulay. Am I correct in assuming it that way, ma'am?
Not actually.
Okay.
The thing is that they were on the same page as far as what should be introduced in India, what kind of education is needed. So both Trevelyan's and Macaulay's argument is same. If you give them education in Arabic and Sanskrit, they will not have a voice in the administration. So how do you give voice to them in administration? It is through modern education. So their arguments are similar.
But I mean, it is wrong to assume that Trevelyan had an influence on Macaulay. Am I correct in saying that, ma'am?
Yes, because many of the arguments of Trevelyan, Macaulay doesn't agree.
All right, ma'am.
So there is a difference. And I can give you my email ID, you can write to me. I don't know, in this chat box, I'm not able to write anything. It is going to only Dr. Faisal Beg. It's not general.
No, you have to select everyone, but send it to me. I'll post it in there.
Okay.
Can you just tell me, ma'am?
Yeah, you check.
No. Maybe just write. Maybe just write it there.
Yeah, she's putting it. I'll put it back into the chat for everyone.
Yeah, for everyone, please.
Okay.
My full name and @gmail.com. Parimala V Rao @gmail.com.
Okay.
I have
great.
Put it.
Such a pleasure talking to you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Who was that?
Okay, thank you. Last raised hand is by Daya, and I don't know if it's correct, but Dayanand or Daya, please go ahead.
Madam, good to hear. There was a contradiction when it came to Scottish missionaries, and I wonder why. Both Duff and Wilson and Anderson in Madras were only targeting high caste people to provide the education. It took almost 150 or more years before a few of the Dalits and others can enter. And only after the Pai judgment. At 50% of seats were available, which according to the government regulation were given to various castes. When in Madras, Anderson started the school, but it was William Miller who converted that into the college, famous
Into college, yeah.
But he would not, neither would his colleagues admit, even a Dalit convert to Christianity done by their own mission, Scottish mission. Yeah, I just wonder why is this that you would expect this. On the other hand, the English missionaries, wherever they were working, such as Caldwell, Tirunelveli, or anywhere, or the London Missionary Society, they were readily giving the education to the poorest and to the Dalit students.
This is also news to me because the data that I have for Bengal presidency, the English missionaries were also targeting only the upper caste. So they were uncomfortable with the Dalit students. Though the Baptist Missionary College, which is a university now, when it was established, there were 4 Dalit students. You know, the first batch had 4 Dalit students. And there was opposition by many because the college taught Sanskrit to everyone. So there was opposition not by Indians, it was by the Baptist missionaries, higher ups, for teaching Sanskrit to Dalit students. So my experience is something different. But then what happens is that towards the end of 19th century, when they realized that they cannot get conversions from the upper caste, then they start admitting students from Dalit categories. Otherwise, in the beginning, I'm not sure. Early 19th century, no, you do not find. Towards the end of the 19th century, yes, Dalit students are there. And many of the Dalit students who are passed out, they also become teachers, and then they are also educational inspectors, educational inspectress. The women inspectors were mostly from the Dalit background, Dalit Christian background.
I'll share my paper with you. Thank you.
And before I invite Dr. Abdul Jabbar, I wanted to ask whether I missed anyone. If I did, please raise your hand or put your comment or in the chat box. So I will call you upon. So Dr. Abdul Jabbar, please.
So thank you. It's a wonderful to listen to this kind of emotional as well, the last slide. Because I come from Tamil Nadu, rural part of Tamil Nadu. I grew up there. I got educated. I think for me, K. Kamaraj was my hero. So he was the one who opened up the free education to rural parts of Tamil Nadu. So when I listened to your presentation, there is the thread of thoughts, even among this Hugh Munro, trying to educate the rural population in India. So that means this kind of thought already existed in the colonial India, that when India became independent, some of the leaders kind of thought through this process and that's implemented. Because without K. Kamaraj's free education scheme, I will never be here, sitting here. So I think, what is your thought on that? How the Indian leaders, post-independent, they kind of went through the process of educating the mass education. So the South India appears to be doing better. That's what I hear. But I think it's all of India. So you have a system of education that is kind of permeated into all societies. Thank you.
Yeah. You're correct. Munro's ideas did not die with his death. They continued. Many of those people who studied in these schools, they continued. Same thing happened in other parts of India. One of the reasons why South India was much better educationally was because of the land system. In a village, if there are 30 or 40 families owning the land, you already have a middle class emerging. Whereas in Bengal and large parts of North India, only one person owned the entire village land, and all others were virtually serfs working on his land. So that itself, gives a important thing. But then during freedom movement, what happened? Some of these elites who came up, for example, Rajaji, Rajgopalachari, he tried to introduce in Madras presidency after India got independence. He was a chief minister. That is, I'm not able to quickly remember this Tamil term. That is, everyone should follow the occupation of his father. Okay, so the schools would run only half a day in the morning, and everyone should follow, go home and help their family occupation. But then what happens to the Dalits?
Regressive.
Very regressive, very regressive. There's a very interesting book, which came out 2 years back. You should go through it. Venkatachalapati has edited it. Half a day for caste. So that was the thing against which DMK fought. And many of the Congress leaders also fought against that. And as a result of that, Kamraj and others, they brought in this kind of free education, quality education. You might give free education. If, like this, what is happening in many parts of North India, teachers don't go to the schools, but the schools are free. But South doesn't happen. If a teacher doesn't come, the community will immediately complain to the higher authorities who will take action. So South worked. I'm not saying completely, because people also resonated with that. People also chose what they wanted to follow in the colonial system. That was a Scottish radicalism.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. The next one, or maybe the last one, from Shrikant Chopra. Any thoughts in reference to 12% literacy rate at the time of independence?
Please come again.
Any thought in reference to only 12% literacy rate at the time of independence?
Yes. Now, it's very interesting. India got political freedom in 1947. It got educational freedom in 1882. In 1882, Hunter Commission recommended handing over all schools and colleges to Indian hands. Even the few government schools that existed, handed over. And they were handed over to the municipalities and district boards. The municipalities and district boards, who were the members of these municipalities and district boards? They were the tax-paying upper classes. They didn't want the lower classes to enter the educational institution. They did not want women to enter into these educational institutions. And virtually they controlled education from 1885 onwards. And it was because of this reason that the percentage of literacy did not go up in India. Schools and colleges were controlled by the municipality and district board members. Wherever the municipalities worked well, Bombay municipality worked well, so the literacy was higher in Bombay city. Whereas in other places like Satara and other places, they did not work. So that was the reason why literacy was so low at the time of independence.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. And there is a comment from Anjum Altaf about the English anyway. So that concludes the question and answer session. And thank you once again to all three speakers and of course the participants. And now I hand over to Dr. Raziuddin, please.
So I still can raise one question. So well, thank you. So there is a little bit contradiction in my own thought or the way you put it. Like English people or the colonial powers were opposed to English education till very late, like 1935. And they were also scared of not natives getting because they will be radicalized. mind that when British came, they were more sensitive towards Muslims because they considered as the primary rebel, group. So how was this? How could that Sir Syed and Englishmen were so close to each other, and they helped actually a lot in putting this Anglo-Mohammedan college right from the very beginning, sort of seen as supporting this whole setup, including sending their English principals, and the medium of instruction was given to Muslim aristocracy in English. So was that not a kind of situation where a whole elite upper class Muslim aristocracy will be well tuned in English education and can become very rebellious or radicalized against them? Was there some kind of understanding between them?
See, the British rule was about elitism. They always considered the elites, Indian elites, as their equals. So they were always ready to support them. In fact, 1830s, late 1830s, they established a school in Ajmer so that all the kings of Rajputana, their princes, could be educated, but none of them sent their children. So the school was shut down. Here we have to understand, pardon?
So this too was a project for only getting upper class Muslims?
Upper classes, not even upper caste who are poor. It is the upper classes, the aristocracy, the elite. The one reason why Sir Syed Ahmad Khan could get so much of support was he himself came from aristocracy. His grandfather was the Prime Minister Diwan of the Mughal Emperor. He grew up with the Mughal princes in his grandfather's house. So that was something that was appreciated by the British. British wanted to give education only to the elites. The light must touch upon the mountain tops before it percolates to the ground.
So you are saying that unlike a popular understanding among Muslim masses or Indian subcontinent people, that Sir Syed was the first Renaissance man, reformer within the community who wanted a mass to educate Muslim masses. Was that really? This is questionable. Like he was
No. I am not discounting his intentions or his ideas. No.
Yeah.
Sir Syed Ahmad Khan had it little easier because of his background.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. Bombay presidency came under the British in 1818. 1820, September 5th, we find a petition by Syed Badruddin Panwalkar and Balaji Krishna Kulkarni, a Muslim and a Brahmin. They are writing a joint petition from Panwal village. Panwal, of course, is a town now. That time it was a village. Saying that they already have an English school in their village and the teacher is of Maratha caste and he is a very good teacher, but we are unable to give salary to him. So, they were hoping that because the British took over the Peshwa administration, they will be encouraging naturally. So the petition was rejected by Elphinstone. So what Elphinstone does is that when the Muslim clergy from Panwal asked for a madrasa was granted, whereas this school, the government refused to pay the fee. So throughout India, I have seen petitions. Hindus and Muslims had identical ideas, but they were all rejected. Most of the petitions are co-signed by Hindus and Muslims. So you also see the civil society, existence of a civil society in the early 19th century. So what we understand today.
Yeah,
it's very fascinating.
Yeah, so, sure. Yeah. I'm coming back. I'm trying to focus more on Sir Syed's alliance with the British occupiers, and in such an easy way as in the eyes of many, it is seen in two ways. Like just now, I got from my friend across from Pakistan who is attending here. He's an educator. He just asked me to raise this question because he already raised one question. So he's saying that was that an understanding that this way British will get a lot of babus? You understand babus? A lot of
Yes.
educated, English educated Muslims who will serve the British crown as bureaucrats or clerks. Was that an attempt? Uh, rather than educating a Muslim to get him to become intellectual or radicalized, they were just were interested in getting them some kind of, absorb them in their administration as clerks and sub officers. Was that the idea?
Yes. Also, they felt safe, even if the, you see, for example, the education that was given in Aligarh Anglo Oriental College and later Aligarh Muslim University was like any other university. It was as radical. They could, once you learn English language, you can read Thomas Paine, you can read anybody else. But
That's
British
not,
were not.
but that's not true actually. At the Mohammedan or college level, at that time, the English principals were very, very vigilant in not having any kind of radical thoughts creeping into the campus. Muhammad Ali was one of the examples, the famous later on to become, Congress president, Muhammad Ali Johar and all those, who were contained basically by the English principles, and a certain other class who wanted to rebel and say things about things. So they were more like tuned, like a British pep schools, a
Yes.
certain style and talk. So don't think about the nationalist thing and thoughts and all that. But is that like a containment of a certain class, train them, absorb them in their bureaucracy,
Yes.
and
Yes. So they trusted the elites more. Even at least the first 20 years of Anglo Oriental College, majority of the students were from the elite background. So the middle class starts entering by the end of 19th century and beginning of 20th century. So until then, Professor Mazhar Hussain is there, who has done extensive research on Aligarh
so is
Women
there,
Development
because
College.
you are a historian in education, or Mazhar Saab, is there a process where especially Aligarh Muslim University started becoming more open to masses, which are mostly lower classes, and the elite is still there, but it became like what Jamia became. Jamia became a Muslim mass or secular based institution where this consciousness of elite was almost dissipated. Is there something that people can think of? I mean, I'm just digressing, but I am more focused on Sir Syed's alliances with the British, whether it was a helpful thing for, as we presume, that we Muslims could get a lot of education, or we elite Muslim got the education were at the expense of mass Muslim who couldn't enter Aligarh Muslim University for another 30, 40 years. That is the question basically to think about. But we are now off time. It's 2 hours, more than 2 hours, especially you are quite late. I can see Mazhar Saab is eyes getting a little red. So
That's
what
because
time
of Delhi pollution. That's because of pollution.
what is
It's
right
about
now
time.
in
It's
India?
about time.
What time is in India right now?
11:35.
It's 11:33.
Yeah. So we should really say bye-bye to each other. Thank you, all three. And it
Thank
really raised a lot. It was wonderful lecture. Actually, today's lecture, a lot of people did acknowledge, most of them are very educated people here, that they now know far more than what they did not know. I mean, something very different came out. It's a very fresh, refreshing lecture. We should, I think, bring back more on more of those early radicals, the white radicals, who were very concerned about our well-being, as opposed to what we thought that all were brutal, I mean, there are some good part also in the colonies.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you all. Thank you so much. And we should revisit on the topic. And this YouTube will be available after a week for public, and that will be a better thing, I think. There is that more and more people can learn better. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank you
very
for
much.
inviting.